So good morning, everybody, and welcome, as I said, to the next in the series of our breakfast briefings brought to you by Represent PA. As most of you know, we support progressive women running for the State House, both the House and the Senate. There are only races. We don't do any statewide races. We don't do Congress. We don't do local races. We're 100% dedicated to flipping the houses in the legislature, both the House and the Senate, with strong progressive women, and we're going to do it this year. I want to bring on our, I'll introduce our speakers for today. Katie Blume is the political director of Conservation Voters in Pennsylvania. She is a long history of organizing on social justice issues, and she's going to be talking to us today about fracking. We're also going to have Katie Muth, who is the represents the 44th district, which is parts of Berks, Chester, and Montgomery counties. Katie is we supported Katie 2 years ago in her race for the Senate, and we're so proud that she was elected. And Katie is a strong voice for all of us in the legislature, in the Senate. And so you'll hear about some of the shenanigans going on with regard to giving special breaks to frackers in Pennsylvania, and how Katie's been a strong voice against this and against what's going on in Pennsylvania. There was a recent article put out in a right-wing publication, a national publication that was targeting Katie and described her as, now get this one, Pennsylvania's own combination of AOC and Elizabeth Warren. I thought they could not have given her a stronger recommendation and support from my point of view, although I'm not sure that's how they meant it. So what we're going to talk about today, we've been talking about a series of ways that the Pennsylvania legislature has failed all of us. They fail us by not going after the things that are important. You may have read about a recent Pennsylvania grand jury report that talked about poor regulation in the fracking industry affecting the health of Pennsylvanians. This is not a casual issue. The health of Pennsylvanians are being impacted by fracking. And these negative effects are felt mostly by the economically disadvantaged. And why is that? Because if you look at where fracking is happening, it's not affecting my water here in Center City, Philadelphia, but it's affecting the water of people located near the fracking sites, and the air with the methane releases in the area among where people are most economically disadvantaged. We're going to talk today about whether there's a connection between jobs and fracking. And I urge everybody to read the book Amity and Prosperity by Eliza Griswold. And it goes into Amity, Pennsylvania, and talks about how people were so excited to get money for fracking on their land and what it's done to befoul their land and their lives. We also are going to talk about drilling. This is part of the fracking. You have to understand the fracking process and how it injects chemicals into the rocks in order to break up the rocks and free the gas. Well, that's contaminated well water across Pennsylvania. Health experts are finding increased air pollution near the sites. Residents near the fracking operations have consistent nosebleeds and dizziness and other issues. This is not okay. And by the way, the other thing you should know is at least a third of the Department of Environmental Protection department has been cut. The people who do the inspections, they're relying on the frackers to do their own inspections. So Represent is out to change Pennsylvania. And how do we do it? We're evaluating all the Democratic women running for the PA legislature on their progressive values. We look at the flippability of the district, and we raise money and invest it in good winnable races. We've invested in many races that the HDCC and other organizations are calling flippable. Look at who Sister Cities is endorsing. Look at who Planned Parenthood is endorsing. We were there first. They're the same women that we've been endorsing, but we find more than that. What are our next steps in 2020? Well, you know that we did our primary or our early applications. Currently, we're looking at applications from 50 candidates. Some of those are re-elects, but some of those are new. Some of those are women that we did not endorse in the first round because they were running against other women in primaries, and we're looking at them now. We're also looking at, this is where we talk about we're making wise investments with your money. We pulled polls and other public and private candidate race information. We're looking at who everybody else endorses to make sure we didn't miss anybody. We're examining the strength of the race to determine our best investment of your money. And our next round will be announced in early September. We're continuing to highlight the major issues in the state. So today, 2 weeks ago, we did policing in Pennsylvania. 2 weeks, and in 2 weeks from now, we're going to be looking at abortion in Pennsylvania. So these are all issues that affect us. 4 weeks ago, we did education. If you've missed some of our previous breakfast briefings, they're all available online at the Represent website, and you can look at the videos. We're trying to focus election messages on down ballot races, and we're encouraging volunteers to join campaigns and help turn PA blue. We should all be writing postcards or doing calls or whatever else they're asking us to do to help these candidates. And as I mentioned earlier, Katie Blume is the political director of Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania. And so she's got a unique and interesting view of what's going on in fracking, and I bring you Katie Blume.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being on this morning. I'm going to try to compress in about 10, maybe 15 minutes exactly what is happening with fracking at this point. There was a news article recently, Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, is selling all of their fracking interests in Pennsylvania. We've seen the markets. There were big economic reports released yesterday about the GDP. The oil and gas industry is tanking, and the federal administration gave them a lot of money to help bail them out. So are there going to be more wells? I don't know. Are there going to be more pipelines? We've seen amazing successes with pipelines throughout the country being taken out by the courts, which is great for community health and safety, especially when you look at particulate pollution. But what is happening in Pennsylvania now to keep the industry viable is we want to become a petrochemical state for some reason. If anyone has read anything about some of the stuff that has happened in Louisiana and what they call Cancer Alley, and what that is just massive petrochemical plants, one after another, and the health rates have not been effectively studied. And Senator Muth and some other amazing environmental champions in both the House and the Senate have a whole host of bills that could address that. What about radioactivity? That is naturally occurring ground radioactivity that is then disturbed and brought to the surface from fracking that happens. So they need a place to use the gas. But on the other hand, when you have major corporations like Shell who are selling their fracking interests in Pennsylvania, then you get the fly-by-night companies. And if you've paid attention to any of the Attorney General reports, you see Cabot Oil is one of them, Range Resources. Those companies are what, bear with me, my cousin is a lawyer for gas and oil in Texas, and he gives me all the inside information. But what happens is those fly-by-night companies then come in and take over these fracking wells, and they don't care about regulations. Shell, Exxon, BP, they have huge national profiles. They get caught up in something that our Attorney General charges them for, they're going to be prepared. They have the resources to actually be more safe, which is weird. But these fly-by-night companies that we've seen in the Attorney General's reports are the ones that are really doing the most damage to communities where fracking happens. And there's a lot of things that need to happen. One, we need to cut down on our use, move to a net zero energy solution. You know, there's RGGI, we keep talking about RGGI. We keep talking about, you know, single-use plastics. For the second year in a row, there was a budget measure passed by the Republicans, championed by State Senator Corman. That would be my senator. That municipalities can't have plastic bag bans. We have to do a study. Things like that will help move us away from petrochemical plants. And when we talk about petrochemical plants, we immediately think of the Shell cracker plant, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. It is the 6th largest construction project in the country right now. And that is specifically to crack the gas to eventually make plastics. But there's other petrochemicals, ammonia plants, which go to make fertilizer, methanol, things like that. We still use chemicals in a lot of what we do. How can we become more sustainable? And these are really big questions that champions like Senator Muth and other great folks are examining. And one of the biggest problems that we have is we are constantly having a fight on the left between jobs and the environment. And there are some serious conversations starting to happen finally about how do we balance those jobs when you have the Beaver Cracker plant, which is a massive construction project, not providing long-term 50 years of employment jobs by any means, but jobs. How do we start having an off-ramp? Where do we start getting people to become the new, I don't know, solar panel manufacturing state? You know, can Pennsylvania transfer to manufacturing for green energy? Can we start becoming, with the joining RGGI, can we really do something to increase our alternative energy standards portfolio, to increase solar and wind and other alternative forms of energy to cut down on natural gas usage just in the energy sphere? And we do need to think about what we do as consumers. And another good example of jobs and fossil fuels, not just fracking, is the coal industry. And the coal industry is really, really fighting Pennsylvania joining RGGI right now. But there are some interesting things that we could start talking about if we had the right legislators in Harrisburg. Certain amounts of those proceeds generated from the RGGI program, meaning Pennsylvania, we sell our energy, other states buy it, we get paid for that because of the carbon, etc. 3-second explanation of a complicated system about the energy market. But what happens is coal. We're not going to be using coal anymore. It's not economically viable. The market has been killing coal. Wyoming coal has been killing Pennsylvania coal. Natural gas, fracking, has been killing coal. But we're going to get all of these proceeds in from RGGI. Why can't legislators also help protect the pensions of those coal miners with the RGGI proceeds? Those are things that are just transitions that we really need to be talking about, and that we can talk about in the environmental space and the labor space and start coming together on, because the environmental movement is by no means against jobs, but we do want a just transition. And one thing we keep pushing some of our friends on is a coal miner could make $80,000 a year. A residential solar panel installer where I live, pay scales different across the state, makes $45,000 a year. Is that a just transition? So what do we do to help labor to encourage unionizing the solar panel installation industry and things like that? What do we do to help labor to shore up pensions, to make sure that they're not going from temporary construction job and these are long-term sustaining, family sustaining jobs? And these are conversations that are taking place, but sadly, wedges are going to keep being driven between different organizations and advocacy groups on the left while we have the legislature that we have. And I really want to, I could talk for hours about this, but what I really want to do is also give you a snapshot, and I'm going to give everybody on here, and thank you, Joanne, for that comment in the chat. We are about, conservation voters, along with some of our environmental partners, are going to be releasing on Tuesday the 2019-2020 environmental scorecard for Pennsylvania. And I kind of wanted to give all of you a little bit of a heads up on what that's going to look like and the state of the legislature and why we haven't had a great relationship between labor and the environment and the left, and we're fighting in this progressive space, not addressing these issues at their core. We had a 500% increase from 2017-2018 session to this session, a 500% increase in people who scored 0 on our scorecard. 500% increase. It is not okay. And this is the legislature that we are dealing with right now. And let me just quickly pull up some stats. Also, thank you, Senator Muth, for being 100% environmental champion. I will tell you that, brand new news right now. But some other interesting statistics when we're talking about electing women, electing Democrats. In the Senate, the average score is 38% for 2019-2020. Democrats, 83% in the Senate. Republicans, 3%. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Democratic women in the Senate, 82%. Republican women in the Senate, 0. 0. Thank you, Senator Muth.
I'm like trying not to laugh because I'm like, oh,
I know.
God, this is so terrible.
You live with these people. You talk to these people all day.
But
Yep.
they come up to you and say, oh, we really got to do something about these unchecked wells. And you're like, you just voted for this garbage bill. Like,
Yep. And then there's a, in the House, because I know we've got some House candidates on here, the state House, average of 40%. House Democrats, 83, House Republicans, 3. House women, 91%. Nice. A lot of good champions elected in 2018.
Yes,
House
represent helped all those women. I just
know.
part of my commercial. You know?
But House Republican women, 4%. That's the average score for House Republican women, 4% to 91%. And I can also tell you another top line statistic. Overall, men versus women, this is my favorite comparison. I might be a feminist. House women, on average, with Republican, there are Republican legislators, female legislators, 52%. It's about 50%, not bad. House men, their average voting, 36. That's where we are on the environment in Pennsylvania. It's not great. We elected 31 environmental champions to the state legislature in 2018. We hope to elect more, work with Represent PAC and Turn PA Blue and all of these amazing organizations around the state to do this. And we need more. Out of the, and this sticks in my head because it's an even number, out of 110 Republican House members, 203 members of the House, 110 Republicans in the House, 90 out of 110 have a 0 score, 0. This is what we're dealing with. This is why conversations haven't been happening. The extreme partisanship of the environment is a big, big problem. And when you have somebody like Daryl Metcalf chairing the House ERE, who during hearings keeps bringing in complete climate change deniers, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Senator Muth and her colleagues in the other chamber can't even get really good bills to solve these problems, to address health and safety, to address just transitions. They can't get any of this even introduced in committee because we just don't have the majority and they don't want to hear it. And we are hoping that we can elect more, we can flip some seats. It's not going to be perfect. Conservation voters, we're looking ahead also to redistricting. in 2022, obviously with the census. If you haven't filled out your census, fill out your census. Tell everyone, you can still fill out your census. But please, contribute to some of these amazing candidates. Keep this going, because we're not going to end fracking, end our reliance on fossil fuels, and keep producing and stop producing dirty energy in Pennsylvania and help people with family sustaining jobs through any kind of transition, as long as the current legislators, the Republican leaders, the men, are there, not even willing to talk to people. So I'm gonna pass it off to Christine, and I wanna give an extra shout out to Senator Muth, because with a petrochemical bill that hit about 3 weeks ago now, time's running together, the last week of session, before the legislators' summer break, a bill called 732. It was a smaller petrochemical bill. We couldn't even get environmental protections added to it. The senator introduced 2 really solid protections, air quality, things like that. Senator Saniciero had introduced some things about some more things on the prevailing wage and public participation, and we couldn't even get that passed. The bill was going to pass, the governor was going to sign it, but we couldn't even get air quality amendments attached to it. And that's what we're dealing with.
Thank you so much, Katie. You know, I have a confession I have to make to everybody here. If you haven't heard me say this before, I used to run power plants in the energy industry. And I became, while I worked in that industry, I became a firm believer in the need for regulation, because I saw, it's the reason I stopped working, but I saw that corporations would go skate right up to the line, or maybe a little bit over, in terms of how they complied with regulations, with the hope that they wouldn't get caught. There was no regulation in this industry. And now I tell everybody I'm in my atonement phase. I'm sorry for having polluted the air, and I'm going to make sure that we elect people who want to clean things up and make it better for my children and all of our children. A couple things that Katie mentioned I wanted to comment on. First of all, she talked about big corporations selling off some of these sites to smaller, quote, fly-by-night organizations. What doing that is done in the coal mining industry is they've created special entities, special corporations that then own these sites, kind of like the gas site in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. And by doing that, then the whole corporation's protected, and it's a smaller subsidiary, separate corporation that owns it. And that corporation can go bankrupt and not be responsible for environmental cleanup and all of the problems they caused, because they run out of money, because all the money has been taken by the parent corporation. And that's what's happened in the coal mining industry. That's why coal miners, you read about them in West Virginia and in Western Pennsylvania, they're not getting the health care they were promised by their corporations, because the corporation became this smaller entity that went bankrupt. And that's what's happening today in the fracking industry in Pennsylvania. The other thing she mentioned was RGGI, something you should know about. It's a way of transitioning power from traditional power sources to clean power sources. New York, Connecticut, New Jersey are all members of RGGI and have worked on this. Pennsylvania has not, because we're worried about the jobs in fracking. But it does provide money, and as she explained, it does provide money and funding for this transition, but that part is completely ignored when you hear the Republicans in our legislature talk about this. And that's my transition. And so one of the things you heard Katie talk about was the kinds of legislation that are brought up. And why isn't good legislation brought up? Why aren't things that protect the environment and the climate brought up? It's because the way the Pennsylvania legislature is structured, the majority has all the power. The minority can complain, they can talk, they can speech, they can be loud, they can be soft, but they don't have any power to bring up new legislation. And that's why we need to flip the legislature, both the House and the Senate. But in the meantime, We've helped to elect some really incredible women who are strong and loud voices. I laugh that traditionally the way people were brought into these two chambers was they were told, now you have to be quiet for a while. You know, Madeline Dean talks about this. You have to be quiet for a while, dear, until you've been here a few terms, and then you can start speaking up. And the thing that I am most proud of is that the women that we helped elect in 2018 are not of that ilk. They are speaking up now. They understand why they were elected. They weren't elected to be backbenchers and to create a job that's going to last in the next 40 years. They were elected because of issues. They were elected because they're strong voices. And I got to tell you, nobody is a stronger voice for all progressive issues than Senator Katie Muth. She was fierce during her election. She defied a lot of expectations, including by the Senate Democrats, as to whether she could win. She won in her own way. She won by relying on her own judgment, and she's continued to do that in the Senate. And we're thrilled to have Katie here today to talk about. Katie, what's going on in the environment and fracking in the state Senate?
Thank you for having me. I'm super pumped to be here. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you as a state senator if it weren't for the people on this call. Many of you have been my supporters, and just starting off with a giant thank you. And every time I do talk on whatever issue or raise hell, it's because you brought me there to do that, and I couldn't have done that without all of you. So the power of all of us working together really does create change. Now we just need more of us there. The Army needs to grow, because the state of fracking, the petrochemical industry, the fossil fuel industry, I'll lump it all into one, and that it's very similar in its history of how it's been just our state's economic balance, and we're starting to see that massively teeter. And so when we talk about the state of the Senate, we obviously are in the minority, and I think it's important to touch on what Katie had mentioned about labor. And so we think of our labor partners, like worker protections and fair wages. And remember, there's private sector labor unions, which are the building trades. And then there's public. So that's like, healthcare workers, nurses, SEIU. And so I've noticed that the building trades really have a very negative impact on the legislature, especially Democrats, in the sense that the political courage hasn't been there because we've been in the minority for so long, that often we have Democrats who are forced to take really, really hard votes because of campaign finance and campaign support. So many people that I work with, both sides of the aisle, have won their elections from really giant checks, many from building trades. And imagine how much it takes to raise $50,000 from a bunch of people versus one check from one labor union. And so I tell you that as a backdrop because I don't want to frame all Democrats who vote for these harmful things to happen as necessarily, they're not all the same. Some are better than others, and many share our values, if not all of them, most of them. It's just a really, really horrible place for us to be in, especially heading into trying to take the majority in both chambers. They have become the bullies. Certainly in Chester County, they have wreaked havoc on Representative Otten. They have become a task force of men that are really out to make the argument for their, quote, jobs. And we're not talking about, like Katie mentioned, the salaries are pretty high. The electrician union workers that are in coal mines make six figures. So this isn't fighting for minimum wage job. This isn't, this is a totally different argument. And we have to be mindful of that, because winning this requires us to recognize that they're fearful of people like myself and Summer Lee and Sarah Amarato, Danielle, and others, because they view in some way that we are trying to end their economic stability. And so when we talk about this issue in the Senate's very, the propaganda spewed out of the Senate some days is very impactful. And you will see Republicans at a podium yelling about jobs, 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 economic development, all, growth. They've never once voted to raise the minimum wage more than 5 cents or whatever that we passed, and it went nowhere. And these people have never worked for minimum wage. And I think maybe because many of us new people came from not a family of economic wealth and stability, that we've worked for $2.83 an hour as a waitress or a bartender, and we've had $0 in the bank, and we've worked our way up versus people that maybe don't understand that struggle. Or I will just say it because I'm sure many of you know on here, I'm not going to beat around the bush. Some people just don't have a moral compass. They just don't give a fuck. They just don't care. They don't care. And that is, sometimes we just have to sit back and say, those are the people. You can talk about them with your grandchildren at lunch in the Senate dining room, and they will go vote against humanity on the Senate floor. And you're like, what just happened? I just talked to so the first year you sort of felt this out, and then nothing shocks me anymore now that in the middle of a pandemic, when we are in economic distress like no other in the history of Pennsylvania, that what do? We give a tax break, a tax credit to a failing industry that makes people so sick and makes our groundwater, our land, our air, our water, and we think that's economic success. And remember, and this may not be a popular comment to say on this call for some, if our governor helped negotiate that bill. So when we talk, we have to have some hard truths here if we want to be talking about who we are as Democrats, because I appreciate that he's pro-choice, but I'd also like him to be like pro-human health at the same time, because it really puts us in a situation where we're in a battle, but we can't fight the battle as Democrats, because some people are forced that are up for re-election. They can't vote against the building trades. Why? Because $100,000 will be put up against them. And so I tell you all this because it is like warfare. It is like being in a chamber of warfare. And sometimes you're like, well, I cannot believe we have to defend this. Like, I don't, and it's fiscally irresponsible, but it's also it's harmful. And so, it's a continuation of legacy pollution. The coal industry screwed Pennsylvania. There was no requirement to clean up after themselves. We're still trying to clean that up. You have coal waste sitting next to frack pads in Western PA. I grew up in Western PA, grew up in Westmoreland County. Last Thanksgiving, I went and did the cancer cluster tour in Washington County. Took my dad with me. My dad is a Democrat in Westmoreland County, so he's a rare gem out there. But and we went on this fracking tour, and I have a East Mariner pipeline in my district, which is a whole nother conversation. But I never really was at a frack pad. I was never at a pumping station. And it's beautiful rural farmland. And then you have this monstrosity. The one site we visited was live fracking that day. There were trucks lined up and down the road. It was loud. It smelled. I had a headache the whole damn day. Like, it was heartbreaking. And to hear families struggle from this, and it's not partisan when it comes down to the people that it impacts. It's partisan in the Capitol, because there are people in Joe Scarnati's district who are protesting having waste frack water stored in their township. Those are Republicans, and they're not having it. So we politicize this to the point, I think, this pandemic has crippled our ability to canvass, and it breaks my heart. I think that's probably the hardest thing for me to accept right now, is that we can't knock doors in some of these places, because that's where those conversations have to happen. And we have to frame it that you don't have to pick between a job and food on the table and your family's health and your health. And we're not doing a good job of that. We're not giving options. And so Representative Amarato and I really have had lengthy conversations about this, because it really cripples both chambers. Look at the vote records on 732. It's heartbreaking. And I've stood in the caucus room for hard votes, and literally have called Representative Rabb or Representative Amarato, and I'm like, they're trying to crack me. They're trying to crack me. And it's like peer pressure from hell. And I'm like, I don't care. I didn't come here to vote for anything but what's best for people. That's it. And so, but it is incredibly hard. And I'm not judging any of my colleagues that have had to crack and take that hard vote. I've never had to do it, because I've always done the right thing. But I'm a unicorn. And I think that's an important thing to mention, that why it's so important to take the majority, because otherwise building trades are going to keep putting us in this position to fight for their failing industry that has no permanent jobs. And remember, there's no permanent health care for these people. if they get sick 20 years from now from fracked water they had to haul around or what, that they often don't even know what they're transporting. These are only union jobs for the construction of these facilities. That's it.
Yeah,
and it's heartbreaking. Go ahead, sorry.
No, that's okay. You may say you're not judging them. I'm judging them hard. And I know that there are Democrats who have had to take very difficult votes, and I understand that, and they're worried about what the commercials will look like. But I also take the second part of your message, and that's, again, why it's so important to elect people who are going to vote their values. Because, again, so many people have not voted their values. They voted to stay in office. And that's just not where we are as a country. It's amazing how fracking has become an issue similar to wearing a mask. It's a sign of your political partisanship, not a sign of the health of your constituents. It's not a sign of whether you're caring about American citizens or not. It's part of the total degeneration of our systems, but we need to elect people to put Katie Muth in the majority. Do you know, you have to remember, we need to flip 4 more Senate seats to have a 50-50 match, at which point the lieutenant governor gets to break ties. 4 more seats. There are, of the 4 top candidates, or the 4 that are given the best chance right now, 2 are women that we've supported, and we supported in their primaries. But there are other women that we're supporting too, to try and come up with that 4. But we need to talk about these issues. You need to have this conversation with everybody around you. A couple other things that I wanted to comment on, Katie. First of all, I don't think there are too many people left in Pennsylvania who think that Wolf is a decisive go up front, assert himself. Some of the budgets we've had show that. I think he's trying to negotiate all sides. And but what I say is we have to turn Tom Wolf from Governor Veto, where he vetoes the worst legislation, into we need to make him better. And the only way we make him better is to give him strong legislation that we believe in to sign, so that his last 2 years as governor, he can go out as the great progressive governor. And it could take a lot of work to do that, but that's where we're heading, and that's what we'd like to do. The other thing is, Katie talked about people with political courage. I just have to echo what I'd said earlier on. Katie is the definition of political courage, and we need to make sure that she's reelected in 2 years in her district. And so I'm sure she's already thinking about that. We're already thinking about how we're going to raise money in 2024.
Thank you, because I'm sure there's a line up to primary me and challenge me.
Before you came on, I told people that the Republicans thought the biggest insult they could give you was to call you Pennsylvania's combination of AOC and Elizabeth Warren. And I think
they hired somebody to write that about me, so I guess yes.
And to me, that's great. I also think it's funny that that there's a cancer cluster tour. A cancer cluster tour. You could go on a tour of these fracking facilities and look at it.
I also think you should pressure people to go on it, because not all Democrats have done it, and you can still do it now safely because it's like 10 people, but like not everyone has gone. And again, like my dad, who again is a Democrat, was just, I mean, my dad had to step outside because I think he was going to cry, because the one mother who lost her son to cancer she was there speaking, and he was just like, it was heartbreaking. And I think that's part of it, is I'm trying, and I know, others, Representative Amarato, we try to get as many people to go on that, because it puts people to the issue versus just legislation. And it forces them to be human for a minute. And I think that's the only way we get people to change,
So, Katie, what legislation would you like to be working on right now? And what's the first thing on the fracking front? Or both Katies answer this. On the fracking front and the environmental front, what's the first thing on January 1st, when you've taken the majority? What are we introducing?
Well, so in the Senate, we actually just finished up a call yesterday. We have 13 new bills we're going to put out based on the grand jury recommendation. Some are bills that have been released before. These are bills that are just basic safety, public health, transparency, things that should already be in place that aren't. So they're not the movers and shakers in terms of completely bringing in, renewables and freaking everybody out. This is things that were gutted from the Marcellus shale effort. back when Corbett was the governor, there was actually an effort to have public health data and reporting in Act 13, and then they gutted it out because it cost an extra $2.9 million. So they gutted it. So there's just basic things that we need to have in place that will increase public awareness about the harms of this. So that's one piece. The main thing that I've been working on lately, and it was pre-COVID, and now it sort of has grown since COVID because we don't know what the economy is going to look like after this. Representative Amarato and I, she and I have been working really hard on an Office of Just Transition, and originally it was just energy related to worker retraining. How do we give people resources so that they can go back to school or training and still get paid and have transportation and have a family sustainable life while they get this retraining? And since COVID, we've now expanded it well beyond just the energy industry. So we are working with a tremendous amount of stakeholders, and we've been taking this, we have a memo dropped, but the legislation itself, we really wanted everyone to feel like they had a seat at the table to be a part of that plan. So that should be out by the end of summer, which I'm super excited. It won't see the light of day in any committee, but I'm super excited. I have my top 10 bills of things I want to pass when we take the majority, and most are things that should already be law, but I look forward to that day because I do think there's so many good bills we have, and being able to transform Pennsylvania, we have the potential to become a leader in green energy and sustainability because we're waiting, like the state's waiting for that development. So it's primed, it's ready to go, and surrounding states are already transitioning. So there's a huge economic opportunity there that will be very, very long lasting. So, and I'm sure Katie can elaborate on that too.
Thank you.
Yeah, and there's actually, I'm looking over at a question here from Heidi, actually, about folks voting against the environment. Some of that goes back to what the senator just referenced about elections and things like that. But also when we're talking about educating legislators, there are 5 full-time environmental lobbyists in Harrisburg. 5 full-time, dedicated to Pennsylvania, not a regional person, environmental lobbyists in Pennsylvania. I am one of them. The Marcellus Shale Coalition employs well over 100 lobbyists.
None of them call me.
And I'm assuming, though, that one of those pieces of legislation you're talking about, Senator Muth, is changing our campaign finance laws. Pennsylvania is one of the few states in the country that allows unlimited amounts of money to pour into campaigns. That's why we have the laws we do. It's tragic, it's terrible, but and I hear people say, well, I don't want to give to a PAC because I really don't like the campaign finance situation. And you kind of go, the only way it's going to change is if we elect Democrats who believe in campaign finance change and institute new laws, and do it while Governor Wolf will sign that legislation. I want to bring up a few people. Helen, if you would just call on, I want to bring on our current candidates, our endorsed candidates, and ask them to just give us, we know you're wonderful, we know you're working hard, we know you're going to invest our money wisely. But what I'd like you to just say is, are you talking about the environment and fracking in your district? State Senate candidate Shanna Danielson.
Good morning. Yes, and I catch flack for it sometimes. But the amount of doors I knocked during petitioning of folks who are lifelong Democrats and told me they don't like Wolf because of his stance on fracking is something I take very seriously in this district. We have some of the worst air quality in the state in South Central PA, and this is right at the top of my platform. It has been the whole time. I had 5th graders crying in my homeroom this year. I'm a teacher, about global warming and how terrified they are about the environment, and that's not okay. So that's certainly something we're centering in our fight.
Thank you.
All right, how about Michelle Worley next?
Good morning, everyone. Hi, thanks for having me today, and thanks for putting on this forum. This has been excellent, so informative, and I thank Katie for being here this morning. We are talking about environmental issues in the 41st, and I frequently get caught up in the argument that Katie Blume pointed out fighting between jobs and protecting the environment. There's constantly a debate about that because I have some folks that are very supportive of my campaign and me as a candidate, but they're also very pro-union. And when I ran in 2018 and I was meeting with these folks, I was told, hey, you got to pull back from pushing it about environmental change because these people are going to get all twitchy and they're less likely to endorse you. And I feel really icky about that. I don't like it because I know that we have got to do better in this area. I have a son who's 25 years old, and he and his friends talk about this all the time. And he tells me on a regular basis, Mom, if you win, if you get elected, you have got to do something about this. You can't let this go on. And I agree, we have to do better for our kids. We can't give them this state of affairs. We can't turn this over to them. It's just terrible.
Thank you, Michelle.
All right, how about Amanda Capoletti next?
Who's going to be joining the state senate with with Katie Muth.
Thank God.
Yeah, how do you feel about that, Katie? We don't need to go into that, but
Very happy.
I want to thank everybody on this call for all of your support during the primary, as well as Senator Muth. Katie, you were a huge part of that, and your support meant everything to me. And it's my turn to try and support as many of the other great candidates as I can, because I'm lucky. My seat is I'm still going to work hard for it, but my seat is one that's been historically safe. So I can have really hard conversations with people about the environment and about fracking and let them know where I stand. And I think I want to echo a little bit of what Shanna said, hearing it from students. I've had high school groups come to me like, this is our issue and our concern. Like, what are you going to do about it? Talking with them. And it's really, I feel empowering having students come to me and say, this is our issue and you need to do something about it and care about us and what we care about. And then to speak a little bit to what Senator Muth was talking about with the building trades, I've talked to a lot of those the union leaders, and I've been very honest with them. I want to support them, their right to jobs and to unionize and collective bargaining. I came from a union family, but I'm not going to bend on where I stand on the environment. I want them at the table to talk about what a transition looks like and how they're included in that transition, so that they can, feel ensured that they'll have their jobs and their good paying jobs and what that looks like. But I'm not going to bend about where we're going as a society and the fact that climate change is real and we need to do something about it now and not later, and addressing those issues now and not later. So we are talking about it, whether it's with the labor union guys or whether it's with my constituents. It is a big deal in my district, and we will continue to talk about it.
And that's a great point, is that this isn't a question of whether climate change is happening, it's happening. This isn't a question of whether the water is being destroyed and the air is being destroyed by this industry, that's happening. And it's got to cut back for the health of our citizens. This is a question about how do we allocate funds to provide a good transition. So thank you. Michelle Knoll, we're out there in Western PA, breathing living the life here.
I'm right in the middle of where fracking is occurring. Half of my district hates fracking, half of my district loves fracking. The half of my district that is still fracking is historically coal mining, North Fayette and Findlay. There's still there's a lot of reclamation, but there's still some coal mining going out that way. There's a lot of fracking. Pittsburgh International Airport, I don't know whether anybody knows this, supports itself with fracking. And so it's a very interesting, I'm right up against the cracker. It's across the river from my district and abuts part of it. And I have a lot of union support. And one of the things I try to do, and this is maybe my education and psychology background, every time I talk to big groups of union people, I say, I really like to be able to take out into the community that carpenters build solar panels, that operating engineers build solar panels and wind turbines. And I think it's, I'm trying to mold and shape some of their thought processes so that we can move ahead of this. I think it's a very difficult position to be in. I walk a very fine line in this particular district. My husband is an environmental consultant, so he is the person who helps people comply with their permits. he is the one out there when they call and say, I think we have a problem. I'm not sure, and we always say, well, yeah, they probably have a problem. And he's the one, he's not the DEP, but he's the person who is helping them comply to those permits. And I know for a fact there are very few people doing inspections. There are very few people from the DEP side because they've had such a big reduction since fracking has started. We've had a 30% reduction in staffing and funding for the DEP since fracking has started. It shouldn't be that way. It should be the opposite way. We should have more eyeballs on what's going on. The fact that I know an awful lot about the petrochemical industry because of my husband's job is somewhat terrifying because I know the mistakes, I know the accidents, I know the things that can happen. And, I know that we need to move away from this as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Michelle.
Lindsay Drew.
Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to Represent PA, to Chris, in general, the support that you have all, shown me and all these other amazing candidates is always appreciated and just really fantastic. And then the incredible women like Senator Muth and Katie Blume and the fellow candidates on here, every time we get on one of these calls, I just feel like it starts my morning out so well because I'm fangirling so hard over all these amazing women. And I don't think it's a coincidence that I have my future is female mug this morning because I believe that, and that the number of strong women running for office and in office right now gives me so much hope for the future. But I'm running in South Central Pennsylvania in just right across the river from Shanna and her Senate district here in the 106th district in Dauphin County. Environmental issues are absolutely important here, particularly air quality and water quality. We're right on the Susquehanna. I'm actually running against a pro-labor Republican, so my incumbent has received the support of the trade unions. The one silver lining to that is, as a candidate, I don't have to compromise, my words and positions on the environment or be concerned, in that regard. Because quite honestly, we shouldn't have to. I believe that there is a way to protect the environment and the health of Pennsylvanians and still support the workforce and the economy. They're not mutually exclusive. And we need to reshape that conversation and really uphold our responsibility on all fronts. We can't compromise the health and safety of our children, of our neighbors. So thank you so much to Represent PA. I cannot wait to get to the State House. We talk about these things all the time.
I got to tell all you candidates. So if you were on the call 2 weeks ago when we had Joanna McClinton talking about policing in Pennsylvania, and Joanna is the caucus chair. And when afterwards, she and I were debriefing, and she said, there's a lot of strong, fierce women running. And I said, you got it, Joanna. And I'm not the one who has to manage the caucus in January.
I am so excited to see what Harrisburg looks like after November because I always joke that they say that women, especially liberal women, are snowflakes. And I'm like, well, if that is the case, winter is coming. Winter is coming, and we are going to take Harrisburg by storm. And I cannot wait to ice out the misogynist, anti-environment, crap that goes on there. So thank you, Represent PA, for your support.
Katie Muth, we're electing your sisters here.
Perfect.
You have a couple more candidates to come on. Previously,
Jill Dannon.
Come on, Jill Dannon. Jill, you got less than a minute. How are we doing?
Okay.
Good. About the environment.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Fracking is not the big issue in my district. It's really infrastructure and stormwater maintenance and drinking water and air quality. That's the issue in my district. But I totally agree with what Senator Muth was saying about the money in politics, and to me, that is the huge issue. But we have to open up the conversation, and we have to change the narrative to say that it's not jobs versus the environment. Everybody wants a good environment and clean air. I think even talking to building trades, they want that. In my opinion, it is to have regulations that are going to keep us safe. And I am very pro-environment, but my feeling is that you cannot affect change until you have a seat at the table and until we take over the majority. And that's just the reality of politics in Pennsylvania. So my husband is a nuclear engineer. So
I got it. Thanks. That's wonderful. Thank you, Jill. Sorry to cut you off. We
okay.
have a couple more, Helen?
Emily Skopoff.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I have terrible Wi-Fi. I'm visiting my parents, and it's been a bit of a, I have one corner in the house that works, so here I am.
So
I can't even.
Now that you've defeated and forced our speaker out of office, how's the campaign going? And are you talking about the environment?
So the campaign's going great. I know I have to be quick. Campaign's going really well. The endorsements are, people who are afraid to endorse because of either Turzai in the past or because of the voter registration, where we still have more Republicans. That's all changing. We've had some great polling that shows me ahead of my opponent. We've never had a Democrat ahead of a Republican in my district ever. So that's incredibly exciting for us. But in terms of the environment, it really only gets talked about when they, not shockingly, when they think fracking is happening next to their neighborhood. So that recently, there is concern about it, but the major concern from folks there, even those who had fracking nearby, when they had the threat of that, was, what about jobs in the economy? So I think that needle is a hard one to thread, but I think especially as a Democrat and a Democratic woman in that district, you have to make it very clear that you can talk about jobs and the economy and green energy. And so they just want to hear that you understand that moving towards a greener economy doesn't mean putting people out of work, that it will mean, there will be an economy, there will be jobs, there will be money. So the emphasis really just has to be on your awareness that we can't just get rid of jobs. We have to replace them with new jobs, other jobs, and sound like there's substance to that. So
thank you, Emily. And I just want to remind everybody on this call, when other people 2 years ago were saying, oh God, Emily Skopoff, she's running against Mike Turzai, how can that happen? We were a supporter, and we were a supporter early this year before other people realized that Emily had a good campaign.
Thank you.
My own commercial for Represent PA. And the last endorsed candidate we have right now is Tara Zrinski.
Okay, so thank you so much. If there's an environmental candidate, I'm it. I have dedicated a majority of my life to environmental issues. I was a reporter for shalereporter.com investigating shale in Pennsylvania. I talked to impacted citizens, and then I became a local coordinator for Food and Water Watch, going to Harrisburg and delivering petitions and organizing rallies and everything else. And I even helped organize tours to Frackland in 2014. I understand these issues, and I understand the problem with the jobs. As a candidate, I've had to face the scrutiny of labor unions, and what I have tried to do is build a coalition around a new jobs program and a just transition. I have aligned myself with the National Infrastructure Bank Coalition, who is trying to get a congressional act to expand a national infrastructure bank, which could create 25 million jobs. And so I find that those jobs for infrastructure are in the wheelhouse of every labor union. I would encourage people to look at that. As a Northampton County Councilwoman, I've also been a champion. I passed the first resolution for a ban on single-use plastic bags and single-use plastic straws, and also passed the first ordinance for CPACE, which is the Commercial Property Assessment Clean Energy, so that commercial entities can have solar. I work in the solar industry, and I am so prepared to go to bat for the environment in Harrisburg.
So what did I say to Joanna McClinton? What did I tell you I said to her? Watch out for these fierce women. I know we have some other women on the call who we haven't endorsed yet, but as I said earlier, we're heading through our applications. And Katie Muth and Katie Blume, thank you very much. You gave us a lot to think about and talk about, and a lot of good words to share with other people. I just want to remind everybody that you need to be part of this movement. You need to, first of all, I know we just went through a list. I know that there's several of you, more than several of you, who've been calling in on these calls who are not yet investors with Represent, and you'll be hearing from us, and I urge you to do it. If you have friends who are, I'm not sure about this Represent thing, we'd be happy to host a Zoom friend raiser and invite you to meet a candidate or two. You can hear from somebody like Katie Muth and telling you how important this work is and how it's going to make a difference. We've got more breakfast briefings scheduled, more for you to hear about. Abortion access. I always say that when this legislature doesn't know what else to do with their days, they say, how can we go at abortion from a different angle? And we're going to have Alicia Gonzalez speak, and State Rep Elizabeth Fiedler is also going to be joining her to talk about what kinds of things get discussed in the House. On Friday, August 28th, we're going to be joined by many of you Emerge ladies know, Ann Wakabayashi. And Ann is going to be our speaker on LGBTQ rights. We're going to have another person on, and then we're going to have candidate Jess Benham is going to be joining us. And then in September, we're talking about early September, mid-September about gun violence protection. We're trying to go at these issues. So if you're an environmental voter, I hope you were listening today. And if you know an environmental voter, the tape from this will be up on our website soon. But if we're trying to go at every issue that anybody can possibly have, depending on your favorite issue, and we're going to be talking about it. As I said, the videos are available on our website, and we ask you to follow us and our electeds and our candidates. I learned so much by watching the feeds of our candidates, magnify them, send them out again, retweet, repost things, because we've got to get the word out there that we can change Pennsylvania and have Katie Muth have more friends. I just need to be in the majority. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm a few minutes late. I usually do better than this, but thank you all for joining us.